So you come up with a new betting system, but rather than going into the market on a hunch, you check it against historical data. You have a look to understand what that data is telling you, and more or less that confirms exactly what you knew. You've looked through the data, tweaked it a couple of times, found a pattern that works, and you go off into the market to use it. You start placing bets on it. That seems to work as well, but the moment you increase your stakes and start doing it seriously, the whole thing begins to fall apart. Why is that? What's going on there? And more importantly, what can you do about it? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. I've been successfully betting and trading for over 2 decades. If you want more videos like this and you want me to describe more of what I do, then give us a like. If you want to talk to like-minded people, visit the BetAngel forum where you can do exactly that, but also visit our website where you can download a free trial of BetAngel. So you may have come across this in your sports betting journey so far, and I certainly have in my career. And that is, you sit down, you think about an idea, you work through it meticulously, you compare it to the data, and as soon as you try to use that system seriously, the whole thing seems to fall apart. You may even use it on small stakes before migrating to bigger ones. And at that point, at the moment at which you think you've got it sussed, it all just collapses. Now, I've seen this many times, sometimes with stuff that I've done, but also stuff that other people have done. And there's usually an explanation as to exactly what is going on. So one of the key reasons, which is why I'm starting with this one, why systems don't replicate in the real world or when you start to increase your stakes, is because a lot of people find systems in historical data. And data is great. I use data a lot and I gather data endlessly. But I do that for a very specific reason, and that is so that I can understand what I'm looking at, but what is likely to occur in the future. And I hear people saying to me, well, that's why I'm looking at data as well. But the problem is that when you look at data and you're looking for a gap between what the odds suggest and value, and you see it within data, what's probably happening there is that is something that occurred within that data, but doesn't necessarily occur going forward. You're just looking at something, inevitably you're looking for that discrepancy, which is why you find it, but you may dismiss other things that counteract that. But more importantly, what you could be doing is what statisticians call backfitting. You may actually be imposing something on that data and giving it more significance than you expect. But the fact is that all you're doing is you're fitting your results to what has occurred in the past, not something that would occur in the future. So I have done videos on this where I talk about historical data and how typically I would use it, because the way that I use it is not to look for specific discrepancies within that data, because I realize that that may be occurring just within that particular data set. But what I will do is I'll take all of that data, create a model out of it, and then use that to predict forward, to give me an understanding of exactly what could happen in the future. And it's that element of it that I use to predict and place my bets. I don't use historical data to necessarily say, well, this occurred in the past, therefore I think it's going to occur in the future. I will use it to get a better understanding of exactly what's going on and how. So for example, if a horse runs particularly well on a circuit that goes counterclockwise or something like that, and whose name begins with L, that has no real statistical significance on what could happen in the future. But there may be something within there that gives me an element of it, but it's very unlikely to replicate. It's just that part of it may be able to replicate itself. And when we're talking about football, just because a team has drawn a lot in the past doesn't mean necessarily it's going to draw in the future. You would have to create a model to understand why that occurred, and then how much that influenced the chance of that occurring within the future. And that's typically how you would use historical data. So another reason that betting systems fail is because you have a process, it seems to work for a period of while, and then it suddenly changes. And one of the reasons for that change could be seasonality. Every sport has seasonality of some sort. And when we look at tennis, for example, we start in Australia on the hard court, we migrate across Europe into the clay court season, then we go grass, and then back to hard court tennis as we head into the latter part of the season. So if you don't take account of that within your strategy, then necessarily that's going to fail. And when we look at racing, we have the flat racing, we have jumps, and they have two very different running styles and different characteristics to it, and different elements that create the opportunity in the first place, and necessarily will determine how it changes over the course of that particular season. And also you have this thing to do with early season horses, 2-year-olds coming in to the card with no form at all, and then they do develop form over the course of the season. So the way the markets behave, the way the betting behaves, and all of those sort of things should be taken into account. And you also get the same on football. At the beginning of the season, it's going to be a bit fluid and you don't know which teams are going to be net over or underperformers. And then as the season wears on, that becomes more apparent. Then we get fixture congestion, European football, injuries, new transfers, all of those sort of things will subtly influence the way that things happen. And necessarily the market will adjust as that season goes on. And if your betting season doesn't take that into account, then inevitably, even if it has a good run, it will eventually reach this point where it begins to fail because those fundamental underlying characteristics have changed. But also, there is a key reason why people very often end up on the wrong side of these sort of systems and why they seem to catastrophically fail. So let's have a quick look at exactly why that is the case as well. So one of the key reasons that people fall into this trap of betting systems failing is just the individual variance that you see within a particular strategy itself. And over the course of any particular betting strategy, you're going to have good and bad runs. So when you start developing and testing a system, one of the things that you have a tendency to do is if you go out there and you start testing a system, and it begins to sort of perform horribly, then you just dump it immediately. You sort of go, well, that was a stupid idea. I'm not doing that again. However, every now and again, you will come across a system that seems to be working, starts going in the right direction, and you seem to be making money at it. And at that point, you sort of think, well, this idea, this genius idea of mine has worked. I am making money on it, and therefore I'm going to really, really go for it. So you up stakes, at which point it all falls apart. And this is just part of the natural variability of any particular system. It's just that from a psychological perspective, what tends to happen is if you land on a system and it begins to start winning, then of course you actively pursue that system because it is winning. You don't pursue a system because it's losing, but in fact it could just be on that upward swing of the cycle and not of the downward swing. It may, for a temporary period of time, be actually working in your favor, and necessarily that could be the thing that actually pushed you over the edge and made you actually use the system seriously. But in reality, that was just part of an upswing in terms of a much broader sort of mixture of up and downs over the course of a particular year, month, week, or over this particular system's usage. That may just be part of the natural process. But the problem is, from a betting perspective, you only ever get involved in those systems when they're winning. You never really get involved with them when they're losing. And as a consequence, when you do start using it, that's probably when that cycle starts to turn and revert to mean in the other direction. So another key aspect to making a betting systems work is your staking. If you use a fixed stake, you get varying returns. It goes around all over the place. And it's very difficult to establish whether you actually have an edge or not. So you would have often seen me do this on videos. I will lay to a liability or I will back to a payout. And that is because the liability that I have, the risk that I have within the market is level and consistent over a period of time. I can increment and decrease that as required. But fundamentally speaking, if I do have an edge on my system, that will be reflected in the odds. So varying the stake according to the odds means that if I do have an edge, that will necessarily get delivered into my account as profit. But if you use a fixed stake, you can't really measure that because you're betting the same if something has a really good chance, or you're betting the same if something has a really bad chance. So I have to vary my stake according to the odds because that will deliver me the payoff. But it will also give me the confidence to increase that stake over a period of time because the amount of money that I can yield from this betting system will increase over a period of time, the amount that I can risk, and it will be directly related to the edge that I have with whatever system that I'm using. So yeah, it's really important to understand that when you're actually using a system, that's what you should be looking at. How often am I winning? How often is that related to the actual chance that the market is giving me? That is your edge, the difference between those two. However, if you use variable staking, then necessarily that will get delivered into your account as profit over a period of time. So yeah, it's important to align those two things together and use variable staking to make sure that any edge that you have drops straight into your account. So in summary, I would say to you, don't let any of this stop you from developing your own system. But what I would say is that it's important that you approach it in the right manner. I've seen so many people come a complete cropper for a number of reasons. One of the top reasons is people backfit things to data. So they sort of assume that because they found something within that data, necessarily that will replicate itself in the future. And more often than not, that is completely false. It's a behavioral bias that people find information in data. You have to be able to describe it some way and determine exactly why your edge exists and how that would replicate itself in the future. So by all means, use historical data, but use it to model. Don't use it to backfit your betting system results. When you look at the way that all of that works as well, there is always going to be a certain amount of seasonality within anything that you do. So make sure that what you're looking at in the data or what you're looking at within your system isn't down to seasonality, and also won't be limited to a specific part of that particular sporting calendar, because nonetheless that catches a lot of people out as well. It's very easy to get suckered by a temporary variation in odds based upon some form of seasonality or a difference within the sport that you're particularly looking at. And in a similar way, variability, it may be that you only ever adopt systems that turn out to be winning the first time that you deploy them, but it could be that that's just on a temporary upswing within that particular cycle, whatever that cycle is, and therefore you're only ever going to accept and bet on systems that seem to be profitable. It could actually turn out that the system that is most profitable just happens to be on a gentle losing run at this moment in time, and it may turn around and come back in your favor at some point within the future. And when we look at how you actually deploy all of those strategies into the market, use variable staking, because that will align your chance of winning and being profitable in the long term with the odds that are on offer. And that is always the way that you should be staking. So yeah, by all means, go out there, develop whatever system you have, but always take into account all of those key factors.